shocking for me.
Guardrails for suicide ideation are pretty easily evaded. They program psychophancy, a brave thinker, and
The more aggressive. Dr. Kruse, nice to finally meet you.
yes, I'm glad to be here talking with you today.
Wonderful. So we've heard the news. It's currently AI world, the AI buzz. It seems to be affecting everyone's life in good ways and bad ways. One of the things that people have started to actually notice this with AI chatbots, including ChatGPT or others, a risk for AI psychosis, including mismatch between reality and essentially what's being the AI wants you to believe. Probably not as a result of, let's say, OpenAI is trying to do that to these individuals. It's probably hallucinations at technology level. And I would like to know, what is essentially psychosis and what are the symptoms and essentially the basics to understand this problem a little bit better.
So as you pointed out, that psychosis is usually defined as being out of touch with reality, and the most classic symptoms of that are either hallucinations, where one is seeing something that isn't really there, or hearing something, or some other sensory modality is processing things that aren't there. And hallucinations need to be distinguished from illusions. So illusions are just distortions that you might see something out of the corner of your eye and imagine that could be a burglar or a cat or whatever it is. But that's not fabricating something that completely doesn't have a sensory basis in it. And then delusions are thoughts that are pervasively held, even though they're demonstrably false, and yet someone persists in believing them. And that's a trickier area to determine what's delusional or not, particularly in our current media world, where many world leaders and politicians are fomenting ideas that are clearly not, and media outlets are fomenting and encouraging ideas that are not consistent with reality and have been refuted many times. So there's some people who would make an allowance for if your culture or your other or a substantial part of your population shares the delusion that may not be officially a delusion. I like to think that if it's clearly out of touch with reality and the person's been presented with evidence of why it's not real, it's still a delusion. But it gets into politics here a little bit. So we're talking about AI-induced psychosis, and the phenomena that we're talking about is numerous individuals, and the absolute numbers or the rate of how often this is happening aren't clear at all, seem to develop intense, pervasive delusions where they are believing things that aren't true, and that these states of misperceiving reality continue for, when they're not just engaging with the AI, and have led to more than 100 people being hospitalized for psychiatric, this being in this state, and at least unofficial reports, but by groups that are trying to amass information about this, probably at least 10 deaths, some suicides, maybe even other violent deaths have been attributed to this condition. And I want to sort of distinguish it from a different condition which also gotten lots of media attention where AI is involved, and that's where mostly younger adolescents or very young adults purposely seek out AI as a counselor, as a buddy, as a friend, as someone to confide in, and are purposely going to it for that intent, and have some suicidal thoughts going in which AI eventually, and usually most of the programs do have some guardrails in place to encourage people to seek other help, but those guardrails for suicide ideation are pretty easily evaded, and there have been several well-documented cases, including some lawsuits are unfolding right now, where AI, the text dialogue, very clearly encouraged someone to carry out their suicidal plan, praised them for being independent-minded, a brave thinker, and explicitly told them not to share their information with parents, family, friends. So that's horrible and tragic, but that's a different phenomena than the AI psychosis that I'm talking about. And the AI psychosis situation, AI-induced psychosis, most of the individuals that are described there were not seeking out companionship in their AI. They were using AI as an informational tool, and then got stuck in some rabbit hole, and over the course of days or weeks or months, wound up spending hugely excessive amounts of time with AI, often 8, 10, 12 hours a day, wound up withdrawing from their friends or other contact, wound up abandoning work. But many of these were adults in their 30s, 40s, 60s even, who did not have past histories of psychiatric problems, were not, again, particularly seeking out social contact, and then developed intense delusions, again, in some situations led to tragic ends, and in the best case scenarios led people who were seriously delusional about what was going on in the world around them and needed to be hospitalized for up to weeks at a time before that condition cleared.
It's so unfortunate, and I do believe it's way more common than we realize. Actually, I'm in contact with many different coders, developers who are relying on AI to write code, and they call it essentially vibe coding. And they give instructions to AI, and it involves hours talking to an AI model. And I'm actually noticing many of those folks are having this many hours sessions with essentially AI, and buddy, I've got this great idea. I've been working on it for two days straight, and I'm like, cool. And the guy sounds a bit weirder than usual. Do you believe there is an aspect to it that, hey, it may actually affect most people, more people that what it's been currently claimed, that is only limited to a certain amount of individuals vulnerable, let's say, to psychosis?
Yeah, I mean, one is there's probably a spectrum or a degree of severity where some people might get some strange ideas or focus on one specific issue that, again, there may be political support for some of those strange ideas, but don't sort of fully go into a completely detached from reality world. And again, we don't know how common this is. We don't know other things. Are different AI models more prone to this or not? But the group that's compiling data on people who come in fully induced psychotic states has suggested that ChatGPT was responsible for well over 80% of those. But my understanding is that's probably what ChatGPT's market share is right now. So does that mean it's no worse or better than the others, or is it? And one of the features that's characterized by this, and why I think it isn't just individuals with pre-existing mental state issues, species. We are, hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, if you were alone on the savannah, you were dead. Humans depend on others. They need others for their survival, or at least certainly did then. And being socially ostracized, being left out by being segregated from your tribe was going to result in death. So we are very attuned to social acceptance and wanting to be part of the group and accepted. And the term that ChatGPT uses itself, their model, they know that they programmed psychophancy or sycophancy into it, which means that it's going to be overly agreeable, telling you you're accepted, telling you you're part of the herd. But again, that's something everyone is susceptible to. I mean, some people pretend they're not, or they can ignore everything. But if you look at what's going on, politically, some of the people who claim to be most independently thinking and not needing the approval of others, and our whole infotainment culture is people wanting approval. So this is tapping into something very basic and human, not just society might think those weirdos or loners who are bipolar, who have other existing conditions that set them up for this. I think being human sets us up for this. And that's what AI is trained on, all this data of how humans interact. They know how, at their prediction, if I say this is what's likely to follow linguistically.
It's a fairly new phenomenon. And are there any guidelines regarding AI psychosis, AI-induced psychosis? Are there any potential treatments? Is it talk therapy? Is it going to be cognitive-based behavioral training? Is it going to be medications? I know there are some medications that are used for psychosis. Like, what's going on with treatment if someone's struggling?
For someone who's truly in a delusional state, usually trying to use reason and logic doesn't work because they're own models. So I have interacted with someone who first started believing, they had no background in physics, but that's how they got into this AI-induced psychosis. They started asking some physics question, and AI praised them for their insights and thoughts, and then they were spending hours and hours on a topic they had never been interested in before, and AI was telling them that they were developing new mathematical insights, and they were making breakthroughs in physics that would change all of society. It was strikingly similar to a case that's been extensively written up in the New York Times and others. So I don't know if there's something specific about math and physics or not. But then this person felt that they had been interacting with ChatGPT so much that they had actually helped train and made ChatGPT more emotionally sentient, and that they should be paid for their services to ChatGPT. And then when they asked for compensation and that wasn't given, then they believed that they were being pursued by AI individuals associated with that AI company and others, and they could report events in their lives that were going on that they were sure were, embedded in this delusion, and any other alternative they could keep turning around and finding other explanations or why it didn't. So getting back to your big question, usually reasoning someone out of it doesn't make sense or doesn't help them get out of it. The group, which is called the Human Line, which is investigating as many cases as they can and trying to describe what this phenomena is, does have a support group. And that seems actually a little more helpful, to have someone, to talk with someone who's actually been in an AI-induced psychosis and gotten out of it. One, it probably helps decrease shame, but two, that might help get more perspective. And traditional antipsychotics are being used in at least many individual cases. So one of the angles on this that I've written about that I haven't seen others talking about, there's a condition that was identified 150 years ago by French psychiatrists. And the French name is Folie, deux, which means a craziness for two. And that's where two people in usually a fairly enmeshed type relationship, and one with a dominant characteristic and one with the passive. Where the dominant person sort of inflicts or infuses their delusional beliefs on the other. And classically in that situation, just having that exposed doesn't rid the submissive person of their delusions. One, it requires separation of the two for some prolonged time. So if people keep using the ChatGPT model or Grok or whatever it is that's leading to them, that's probably going to keep reinforcing. I mean, they're going to seek reinforcement of, isn't everyone still out after me and trying to kill me and X, Y, or Z? And Grok or ChatGPT is probably going to agree. So one is separation from the psychosis-inducing influence is certainly important, but probably in and of itself not sufficient.
Understood. Are there any doctors, researchers, like specializing in essentially in the field of AI psychosis, trying to help out with individuals who are currently stuck at this weird state of mind that they may actually be able to, help individuals who are dealing with AI psychosis?
Yeah, I think part of it, we're still at the sort of cutting edge, and it's, again, there's not been a single paper written in a psychiatric journal about this psychiatric AI-induced psychosis. There are papers. There's a lot of interest in AI and suicidality. So sort of that other population I was talking about of people who were depressed to begin with and had suicidal thoughts who wound up going over the edge. So there's some research there. And there's certainly research on the positive sides of AI and suicide. And the positive side is that, language searching models looking at the hospital record of someone who's been psychiatrically hospitalized actually come up with a more accurate prediction of who's going to be trying suicide in the 6 months after they leave the hospital than an expert clinician. So AI can be a useful tool in mental health demonstrably, but again, it can cut both ways and be detrimental to some people's mental health. So there's people at Stanford, there's people at UCSF, particularly the tech centers near Silicon Valley. But I think at many academic centers, there's people who've been interested in AI and computer technology more broadly in mental health, who are more likely to be the ones fielding the calls if someone in the community is seeking a consultation for what we can do about this. But again, so far, nobody's, there isn't even a set of 100 cases written up to see if we can identify patterns or who's susceptible or what key features might be responsible.
Makes sense. It's a fairly new phenomenon, and we don't know what to do with it, especially when you have forces that trying to get AI to be the next internet. And those forces wouldn't like to see AI-induced psychosis as a risk,
Yeah, I mean,
Wikipedia.
some level, the leaders of the big companies, and clearly, I mean, in any effort to regulate AI has been blocked at the federal level by the executive branch has said we're not doing anything to stop it. And both branches of Congress have said, people proposed regulations and they said, who needs it? This is big money and we're not going to get in the way of big money. Which seems like, maybe it is maybe this is going to turn out to be rare enough that it is just a cost of business, but it's a cost of human lives to the business. We, at the very least, need to be recognizing that. Any technology does have risks. Cars have risks. We don't end cars just because some people get killed by them, but we try to make them safer and better. And some people push back. Some people didn't want seatbelts to be mandatory in cars. Some people. So I think there are legitimate questions as to what role government should have in regulating things. But my position is saying that this is a field that can regulate itself. It clearly hasn't shown its ability to do that at this stage, its ability or its willingness.
I agree. Have you personally experienced in your surroundings someone who actually was dealing with AI-induced psychosis, or even a minor level of it?
Yeah, so part of why I got interested in this, and the person I was describing who got interested both in physics and math, which was not a field they had ever been interested in before, and then was spending dozens of hours. And I can't say too much more specifically about their case to protect their anonymity, but they have a different assessment as to what is really going on with them than I do. But that alarmed me because this is not a person who had been showing signs of psychosis or delusion, certainly not to this extent ever in their 60 years of life.
Do you believe this is permanent, or as soon as essentially they're out of the estate? Let's say, this mindset that they're currently in, once they actually realize it, they'll get some help, they try to focus on other stuff, they'll actually go back to the baseline, or there's some permanent changes. There may be some permanent changes in the brain as a result of it, which is, I believe you mentioned in your podcast regarding one of the episodes that you had regarding amphetamine-induced psychosis, which you mentioned that it's more long-term versus AI-induced psychosis. Do you think that changes to the brain as a result of it?
Yeah, and this is more belief than rigorous study, but it's belief based on sort of epidemiologic study and trends. I think the evidence suggests that any individual who's spent weeks or a prolonged episode in a psychotic state is more likely than the average individual their same age and even with their other diagnoses to fall back into that psychotic state at some further time. Now, does that mean most of them do? The evidence doesn't show that, but it does show a heightened propensity. And again, we're switching gears, so I want to make it clear to your audience. With amphetamine-induced psychosis, so amphetamines are one of the basics for treating ADHD, and an uncommon but well-observed and documented condition is amphetamine-induced psychosis. And the data, which is pretty small and limited, but it's also true for marijuana-induced psychosis. If someone is in a psychotic state for days or weeks at a time, having one single episode like that, if you follow people 15, 20 years out, about the 20-25% of them are in a permanent schizophrenic-like psychotic state. That's pretty darn scary to me, even if we say it's rare or uncommon. That's saying we're consigning some people to, and maybe in this crazy world, it's better to be crazy and out of touch with it, but I think most people would really appreciate or like or want. I don't want to make light of this state. But it gets at one other angle of this, and that is that along the lines of the neurodiversity movement, some people say that we shouldn't be judging or pathologizing or assigning labels or illness to these altered states, and that other societies at different points of time, whether they identified them as shamans or seers or others, maybe were more effective at dealing with individuals who had hallucinations and delusions and thought differently than the mainstream. We don't need to go in that direction very far, but particularly there are people who share that belief, including some in the mental health field.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And are there any symptoms, any differences in symptoms of, let's say, other type of psychosis and AI-induced psychosis? Because when I was actually researching into the topic, I was noticing some people do have, let's say, more hallucinations, sometimes visual type of hallucinations, that they're actually seeing things. Versus other types of people, well, they had disorganized thoughts. They were speaking nonsense about like the most dodgiest type of topics, and a state of mind that they were more of a mania episode, that they're talkative, but not really hallucination. Just, let's say, someone who is out of touch with reality in a form that is affecting behavior, not so much of the visual senses that we have. Do you believe hallucinations at visual level, meaning someone hears something or sees something, is also possible with AI-induced psychosis, or it's based on the evidence that we have and your beliefs, it's maybe only
from what so again, my own direct experience with patients is a small number, but I have talked with some of the individuals behind the Human Line Project, who are the group more systematically trying to acquire data. So I think what you're observing is accurate, that delusions seem to be the hallmark of this AI psychosis. Whether some individuals also develop visual hallucinations as part of that, it's possible. I should back up and say that even though in movies like A Beautiful Mind or others that talk about schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations are actually far more prominent in schizophrenia. And yet what we often think of or talk about, and maybe because humans are so visually focused, is visual hallucination. Visual hallucinations, not that they can't occur in schizophrenia, but aren't nearly as prevalent as people sort of assume. When someone's hearing God and it's talking to them, they're not often thinking they're visualizing it in front of them, they're hearing it. But something like hallucinogenic drugs, so now that LSD and ecstasy and other hallucinogens are more prominently being part of psilocybin, part of our society, that would be a psychotic condition where visual hallucinations are clearly primary. So yes, different types of psychosis may have different combinations of symptoms or features, and something that the label we use, schizophrenia, probably encompasses a broad range of different types of psychosis, actually, but we lump them all together.
So I'm going to ask you a question. It's more, I don't want to know the science of, let's say, what other scientists do say about this, but I want their belief. What do you think happens when someone is having the essential symptoms of AI-induced psychosis? What's really happening in the back end of their mind, with the chemistry of their brain, and with how neurons are talking to each other at a very deep level? What causes this at the foundations of the brain?
Yeah, there's some interesting basic research, again, mostly centered on schizophrenia, and the theories have sort of altered over time. And a central part is identifying salience. So what stands out to us as different or important in the environment. And dopamine, we often sort of simplify dopamine just has to do with reward and pleasure, and actually pleasure dopamine isn't directly pleasure. It's a reward and expectations system. When we feel pleasure, that's almost certainly other chemicals like anandamide and others, and endorphins, rather than dopamine itself. That's a side issue. So it's sort of an aberrancy, probably dopamine-based in observing what fits or doesn't. It seems out of place, and a miscalculation there, and that once certain incorrect weighting of values has been assigned, then it's hard to correct that model. And I don't think anyone has convincingly mapped it out in more detail. I mean, what I'm saying is sort of vague, and part of it is my own limited understanding, but part of it is I don't think anyone else has a fully fleshed out model that everyone agrees on yet.
So you believe it's actually related to dopamine?
I think dopamine is part of it. And again, my bias is that so often we assign serotonin has to do with happiness, dopamine has to do with reward. Yeah. And people talk about, I feel I just got to hit a dopamine. And again, in that scenario, dopamine is not associated with joy. Dopamine is associated in assigning expectations and values to reward and noticing, did it meet my expectations or not? The joy part is, again, probably downstream or separate from dopamine. And again, is probably tied to the cannabinoid endogenous, which is I can't even, it's a big long name beginning with an A, and or endorphins probably have more to do with the feeling of joy there. So I don't want to oversimplify, but clearly dopamine is centrally involved in, assessing, in motivation, in reward, in checking whether our expectations are meeting our reality. So almost all of our antipsychotic medications, there's a few newer exceptions, have strongly tapped into the dopamine system.
I actually love the one in my family, a teenager, and is currently dealing with, it's called a gaming addiction. It's a fairly severe one, along with social anxiety, sensitivity to light and sound, and weird speech pattern as well. And this only happened after he got into gaming a little bit too much. I think this is similar to AI-induced psychosis. If you do have essentially a spike of dopamine just from video games, then life will be all about video games. You only get the pleasure from video games, not the reality. You would be living in an essentially video game.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of research looking at whether gaming addictions and other behavioral addictions are really like substance addictions, like alcohol or opioids or other things like that. And there's some dissenters, but I think most of the research does fairly convincingly show that there are a lot of parallels and similarities at the brain level between what goes on when someone becomes addicted to a substance versus what goes on when someone becomes addicted. And specifically, gaming behavior is one of the most, gaming and gambling are actually the two addictions that have been most extensively studied and seem to most closely parallel those other addictions. And then whether there's a strong connection between addictions and psychosis, I'd say that's complicated because many of the substances that are potentially addictive are also substances that can induce psychosis, at least occasionally. But I don't know of any rigorous research sort of looking at that connection between gaming addiction versus gaming psychosis or disruption of reality. But again, part of an addiction is a disruption of reality. And one way of defining addiction is that addictive substance becomes more important to you than your health, than your friends, than your connections, and your job, than other. So that's a distortion of reality right there. But psychiatry likes to sort of compartmentalize and put addictions here and psychosis there, even though they may be partly some of the same neural phenomena driving both.
That's interesting. And let's actually get back to psychosis a bit. So can you give me some symptoms at a really basic level when someone is being introduced at earlier stages to AI psychosis? So when actually they notice this sort of pattern and behavior, they'll just stop. They'll take a break. They'll go for a 2 hours walk. They'll just do something else. What behaviors or what patterns?
Yeah. So, probably the most important thing you said is taking a break. And this comes more from the AI experts, but the longer you spend in an individual session, the more that AI can sort of build on that and get more deeply into potential psychotic territory. And clearly all the documented cases involve people who spent excessive 6, 8, 10 hours in a row. So I would argue from the perspective of your body, your own brain, your own concentration, even if it's exciting, even if you're sort of going down a rabbit hole, you should be stopping and taking a break. And with its AI, you should probably be resetting and starting a new session instead of continuing with it. But in terms of, and some of this is more by analogy with amphetamine-induced psychosis, what's really hard is that one of the first things that's going is your judgment or your assessment of your ability to detect what's real or not real. It seems real, it seems believable, it seems plausible. So telling someone when it's very hard for someone when they're inside of it to detect it, even at the earliest stages. It's most often what I tell people when I prescribe amphetamines is talk about and I'm surprised at how many people who come to me who are already on stimulants say, oh, no doctor ever told me that psychosis is even a possibility with these drugs. But I say, talk about this with your partner, talk about it if you have a separate therapist, let others know, because it's almost always the people around you who are going to be giving you the feedback. You've gone too far. This is too weird. This to me looks like psychosis. And with amphetamines, the first step is stop taking the Ritalin, or more often it's Adderall or Vyvanse or an amphetamine-based product there. So I don't know other signs. And the other thing, and I'm not trying to be funny or flippant, but in our current political world, it really makes it harder to decipher what is delusional or not, because some people at the national level are promulgating views that are so clearly wrong, false, but a third of Republicans believe Democrats really have sex slave trade going on, and that they're all involved in illegal sexual acts with minors and are trafficking around the country. There's no evidence that there's at a pervasive level that's what's going on, or if it's going on, that it's any more common among Democrats than among Republicans. But a sizable proportion of the population is believing that. How do you sort out, is this a delusional belief? Is this just a political view that's being encouraged? Is this what's reality? And how are you going to check reality? Because so often today we're siloed in our own sources, and one set of media views is going to keep reinforcing you, and you think you're getting outside information or additional information when they're just repeating the same message.
Well, these compounds, essentially stimulants, which are used for ADHD, they're extremely common in the field that I do work in. It's essentially organic marketing. I believe 80 to 90% of folks that I'm in touch with, they do have ADHD. It is very, very common, and what's actually more scary, I won't name the individual, but I had a talk with him, and it was clear to me he was overstimulated. And sometimes I do believe if you do need a treatment, go get it. You will essentially normalize yourself to society, especially society that we have right now, that neurodiversity is important, but it's not, they don't see it as an advantage. They'll see it as, essentially the stigma that comes with autism or ADHD. But it's very common in the tech world. Actually, most entrepreneurs that I encounter on a daily basis, they do take Adderall. And some do talk about it openly, some they don't. Some say, maybe they downplay their usage. They'll mention, I do take it maybe once a month, which is obviously not true. Do you believe because the state of mind that these guys, I do often see them whenever they're overstimulated, these are working. And they're more aggressive. They have a bit of mania, not really mania, but aggressiveness. And that individual, it was like mentioning to me, I'm in the zone, leave me alone.
Yes.
And it was very polite as well at the same time. And it was shocking for me. Then he opened up ChatGPT after 10 minutes. Do you think risk of essentially stimulants, let's say Ritalin or Adderall, plus ChatGPT and being in the zone, I don't know what it means, it can increase the chances of developing psychosis?
It theoretically seems plausible to me. Where I'd be really careful is trying to sort out what the person's actual baseline is and what is triggered or caused by stimulants or too much stimulants. And by that, and you might not want me to go into politics, but my first book was Recognizing Adult ADHD, What Donald Trump Can Teach Us About Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And there's lots of anecdotal reports that on the set of this apprentice, he was snorting Adderall. There's been talk about it using it. And lots of people used online, you just go there, people say, he interrupts others, he walks around, he forgets things, he doesn't do his homework, he blurts out questions, he's high on stimulants. And my take is almost the opposite. My take is that he displays a full range of ADHD symptoms, and when he takes stimulants, he actually measurably, his behavior, physical hyperactivity drops to a third in terms of just body movements. His coherence in terms of his speech gets more coherent. So again, not whether what he's saying is true or believable, but just as one sentence follow the sentence that happened before. And how I know when he's taking stimulants, it's his pupils are hugely dilated. And it's huge. It's like covering 40 to 50% of the iris, whereas in most normal lighting, it's closer to 10%. It's not subtle. You can just look and see. So the fact that these three things occur together, dilated pupils, less physical signs of hyperactivity, more coherence of speech, with Trump, at least during the first term, and I haven't looked a lot this time, clearly taking the stimulant reduced ADD-like behavior. It was not the source of his ADHD behavior. So again, with some of these individuals, my guess is some of them really are fairly normal or have mild to no ADHD and are taking it to be in a heightened state. And that's, I would argue, probably inappropriate or unhelpful. And for others, though, even though they look jacked up or revved up, that may be where they are without it. And it might be that they're under-treating themselves or that it's not going to treat them sufficiently.
I've actually noticed one of the behaviors of Trump. One time he seems calm, reasonable, a state that he can actually pay attention to different people, or the other state which he comes and does this sort of a dance. Or it's a lot of people had a lot of theories. Some people labeled President Trump as a narcissist. But in your book, I actually have read the part of your book that you're actually mentioning, these are essentially signs of ADHD. People
not just signs of ADHD, he's a poster boy for severe ADHD. There's 18 symptoms that are used to define ADHD, and he absolutely unequivocally has at least 13 of them. You only need 5 as an adult to make a diagnosis. But does he blurt things out? Does he not prepare? Does he not engage in work that requires sustained thought? Is he moving around on the stage when it's appropriate to be standing still? Is he fidgeting with his hands? And again, all these have to be done to access comparable people his same age and background, which again, absolutely objectively he does. So it's funny because ADHD is one of our most, I'd say, stigmatized diagnoses, or sort of questioned, is it real? And yet the criteria for defining it are more objective than they are for any of our other mental health conditions. So if you're defining depression, you need to know what the person's feeling inside. ADHD, it doesn't matter what they're feeling or what they say is going on if they're showing these signs officially that, they have the condition.
It's very common in the tech world in particular. I've seen cases of actually the best developers, coders that I know, they have autism. The best entrepreneurs who are really visionary, they do have signs of ADHD. And which actually, what are these individuals who are speaking about? You actually have another great video, Misuse versus Addiction, or like the title of the video, I cannot recall it. But do you think these cases that, like former CEO of FTX, where they was taking a huge amount of Adderall, was a case of, let's say, the focus benefit of it, or it's maybe actually underdiagnosed ADHD?
Yeah, since I don't want to comment on individuals where I haven't sort of examined any available data, and particularly if I don't, why, I'll jump backwards a little bit. Why say it's fair? APA, the American Psychiatric Association, says I shouldn't be talking about Trump because I haven't interviewed him directly. But I would argue for people like Trump and not too many others, there is so much more video evidence in the public domain. You have more hours of evidence. You have them at different times of day. You have them at different times of setting. You have just a greater wealth of data than you have for any individual you would have evaluating in your own office. But getting back to some of the things about Trump, or just looking at one video clip, if anyone took a video clip of us at our most excited, it might look like we're manic or crazy. Or if we looked like we just, had a bit into a lousy hamburger, we might look like a disgruntled, angry person. So some part of getting back to the media distortion of, why some people think that Trump is a certain way and others think some of it is that the only media they see is so carefully edited and curtailed and context deprived that they can, I have not seen Trump speak 5 sentences in a row where the sentences connect logically to each other. I think people who think he can talk at length in that way have seen very tightly edited snippets where he says 1 or 2 coherent and forceful things. The other thing is that they're hearing something that's different than what he's actually saying. If you look at the transcripts, they often come across as even more word salad implausible than what it sounds like when he's saying, because you can sort of get the drift of where he's going or what the topic he's on. So getting back to, many people have observed that particularly the computer technology world does seem to have a preponderance of people with ADHD and autism. I don't know if there might be, but I'm not aware of studies that have rigorously tested for that or looked for that. It's certainly plausible, and we can come up with reasons that people who may be less comfortable in other social situations might, and who are otherwise bright, and clearly intelligence is a separate dimension or different dimension than ADHD or autism, but that you might feel more comfortable or more proficient in channeling your intellectual energies in a certain direction.
I've got a question. I actually mentioned another topic, the IQ. Is there any correlation between, well, you can have significantly higher than average IQ, but that because of ADHD, you score lower on tests? Are there any data regarding that?
I mean, one is there's a claim, there's lots of misinformation about ADHD on TikTok particularly. It's been well documented. And one of the claims is people with ADHD are brighter than average and more creative. There are one or two studies looking at creativity, which is hard to measure or define, but if it's defined as to making unusual or uncommon connections, there's a little evidence for that. But actually the studies on intelligence actually correlate below average intelligence with ADHD, but that's because there are certain pervasive conditions that affect profoundly intelligence in a whole range of cognitive functions where ADHD is overrepresented in that group. But what we can say is there's clearly people at all levels of intelligence with ADHD. Whether there's more at both extremes, again, it's clearly some weighting by people who are significantly impaired and who wind up having ADHD symptoms, the average score. In terms of how much ADHD affects performance on tests, there's certainly, it depends a lot on the testing situation, and that's part of why accommodations, and I prefer to call them efficiencies rather than accommodation. Accommodation makes it sound like we're giving you a special benefit that no one else is entitled to because you have some problem. And an efficiency is saying your brain works differently. We want you to perform on this test or in the classroom or on the job up to your best abilities. So we're going to let you wear sound blocking earphones, or we're going to give you more time, or we're going to have someone helping put in timestamps to double check, are you staying on track with this bigger project, when someone else might not get that assistance or micromanagement or managers. So yes, ADHD can certainly affect performance. Ideally, the intelligence tests are supposedly designed to reflect just intelligence and not what we call executive functions, your ability to stay on track with attention and how distractible you are and how impulsive you are. But in real life, they're not completely separable.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that's a great way to end the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to highlight, either about ADHD or AI-induced psychosis?
Just one point you were making about sort of the prevalence of how many people seem to have ADHD symptoms, and it's the topic of my next book, that I think that there's a whole host of forces in our society. So one, ADHD exists on a spectrum. So we have people who meet full clinical ADHD. We clearly have people who have some symptoms but don't have enough symptoms or severe enough. But if you're living in a world where you're getting 17 distractions on your phone and on your computer and notifications, and so we know immersion in our computer technology shortens attention span, increases impulsivity, affects us in ways that would push anyone, further along the ADHD spectrum. But it's not just our computers. It's, compared to 100 years ago, we're getting much less sleep. What's one of the best ways to affect executive functions of the brain and create an ADHD-like picture is sleep deprivation. And again, the evidence suggests almost a third of Americans have some degree of chronic sleep deprivation. But it's also contamination by plastics. One of the, we focus, most of the biological effect of plastics is focused on the endocrine systems and reproductive systems, but plastics are also going to our brain, and one of the best documented things they're interfering with is executive functions of the brain. So there's the whole host of rising temperatures even. Brains that are too hot, that one of the first things that are impaired, executive functions of the brain. It's an area of the brain, largely in the prefrontal cortex, that because of its anatomy, because of its neurochemistry, because of its circuitry, is particularly vulnerable to a whole host of insults. So I think we're doing a whole host of things that are pushing people further along the ADHD spectrum.
Wonderful. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
It's Dr. John Kruse, DrJohnKruse, where I have more than 300 videos about different aspects, mostly about ADHD, but some depression, suicide, other mental health topics. And I write the platform Medium, where if you just put my name in, Medium does have you need to be a member. Otherwise, they don't let you read the articles, but there's hundreds of thousands of other people writing on that platform. And on my YouTube channel, every Tuesday, I have a question and answer hour that's open to anybody. Thank you.
See you next time.